You have questions? We have answers. Welcome to the Therapist Question Box with your host, Miss Lindsay Schiss.
Welcome back to another episode of the Therapist Question Box. We are here to answer your tough questions. So make sure to submit questions and ask us your toughest mental health relationship questions. We are here to answer them. Today I have with me Kathy Kinghorn. Kathy, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Kathy's the owner of Therapy Utah and a great resource and a mentor of mine, and happy to have you here talking about this topic. It's one that if you haven't dealt with, you will at some point, or you will have a loved one dealing with this. And I'll just go ahead and jump right into the question. How do I deal with all of these grief feelings while I'm still actively caring for my aging parent? Interesting. So tell me what your thoughts are when you hear that question.
Boy, my first thought was my heart just went out for the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're in pain. They're seeing the end, and just the pain from that question was tangible.
Yes, I agree with that. Like, how can I deal with these grief feelings, right? It's like grief is typically when something is taken or there's a loss, but they're still there. The parents are still there, but there's grieving happening. So as I hear that, I hear a lot of anticipatory grief. So can you talk a little bit about that? What is anticipatory grief and how does it show up?
The short of it is that you can see it in the distance, and it could be a few years. You could get a diagnosis of, for example, ALS, which deteriorates your body over time. And so you're going to anticipate over time the loss of mobility, the loss of function of your body, and the time frame changes depending on who you are. So it's the long goodbye is another way of looking at anticipatory grief.
That's a great way of saying it. And it's not just the goodbye of death, right? But it's loss of relationship, loss of that connection, loss of the parent-child, maybe, where you stand in the relationship. I think there's so many losses. It's not just the death.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a client right now who's going to be retiring after 25 plus years at the same company. And there's grief involved in that.
You bet.
You lose that title. You lose that function.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we think, oh, it's retirement. Congratulations.
Yep.
Now you get to live your life. Well, wait a minute. That's been part of this person's identity for so long. So all of a sudden thinking that's just going to go away, that doesn't happen.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So there's a lot of different types of grief. So how would you say that you can honor your grief while still being present with what you have, right? They're still there. And as she's saying, or excuse me, I don't know if it's a she or he, but that this listener is saying there's grieving feelings, but they're still caring for their aging parents.
It's hard to capture in a question. So we may, let's answer it maybe in a couple ways.
Okay.
One is the person might be grieving. There's just not going to be closure on some issues between my parents and I. I can see that. Their mental capacity is diminished. Their ability to step into an uncomfortable spot, maybe they never got to. And they may be just grieving, they're gonna pass and I'm never gonna have, and I'm sorry, or I can see your side of it. So those feelings that are coming up of grief, it may be the feeling of a loss of closure.
Gosh, it's so interesting as you say that, because you think about that. And I think sometimes we forget that there's grief about closure. It's not just, again, the grief of the loss, but you may not have that conversation. You may not get that apology. You may not get that closure. And there's grief in that.
For sure.
And to acknowledge that. We can't just brush that under the rug and hope that, everything's fine, but recognize oh no, that's something to grieve.
Right, absolutely. And on the other hand, they may have a beautiful relationship, this listener, with their parents, and they're grieving the loss of this beautiful relationship. And watching, I remember the first time I pushed my dad in a wheelchair. he had was leaving the hospital, and my dad was just a blue collar worker. He was a meat cutter my whole life. Strong guy, tough guy. That moment in time is kind of etched in my mind of pushing him in a wheelchair for the first time. It was rough to see the dad that I grew up with wasn't going to be there any longer physically. His physicalness that I grew up with wasn't there any longer.
Yeah, and to see him as a strong, able-bodied man that like you're pushing him in a wheelchair. That's never. He's not that capacity anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whichever way the feelings are going for this listener, first, just to how beautiful that they recognize, hey, I've got some feelings around this that I need help with. We ought not to think that grieving should be done on an island. That's just not the economy of how societies work in a healthy way. Grief for most of human existence, take out even just the last even 50 years, we were really tight with our families. We lived by them. We lived in the same home with them. Grieving was a communal experience. And so we're in this really new era of I'm living in another state and my mom is dying in this state, and for lots of different reasons I can't be there during this time. So there's a lot of it's
so complex.
Yeah, it is.
Well, and as you're saying that, I think, there's a pull there, right, to take care of and to be with, and yet there's situations where we can't always be that person, and the grief around that. Yeah. Right? If you're the caregiver, there's grieving. If you can't be the caregiver, or you're not the caregiver, there's grieving. It's so complex. Right. And nuanced. It's not just, this makes sense. You're losing your parent. This is what's going on. Like, there's so many complexities to this that I think are really important. I wonder if you can talk about the emotional conflicts that caregivers experience.
Well, grief, first of all, we just aren't educated about it. We in school, we're certainly not going to get it. And as our families kind of get more away from each other, we don't really experience, a lot of us don't experience a close-knit family, or even in that close-knit family, maybe we're taught just you don't talk about grief.
Right.
And so I think we are kind of illiterate as a society when it comes to grief.
About grief. I would agree with you. I would totally agree with you. I think grief is uncomfortable. Yeah. It's not comfortable. It's not nice and fluffy. And so we just try to manage it or try to hurry and work through it as quickly as we can. Right. Yeah. I think it's one of those things that, when my mom passed away, I was 17 years old. And I remember so many people would come to me and say, isn't it great? She's in a better place. Ugh. Isn't it great? Like, she can help you more from the other side. And I remember just actually feeling like, no. But what came out of my mouth was yes, because I could tell they were uncomfortable and I was uncomfortable. So I just thought, let's just get rid of this discomfort for everybody. But what it was I was grieving, and I didn't know how to grieve. And unfortunately, there were some people that could help me grieve, but there was so much discomfort around my grief that I don't feel like I learned that until years later.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's such a common experience, Lindsay. When we get uncomfortable, typically we go into fixing it to make that uncomfort stop. And so that experience for you, it's a hard balance, because it's certainly well-meaning people. Totally. Certainly that. And do you even have the energy in the moment to say, stop saying that, because then that might cause more conversation. So your yes was really your body going, hey, I need safety here.
That's so true. It wasn't just a cover story, because I've often thought that, like, oh, that was just a cover story. But the truth is It was probably my body saying, I can't have this conversation right now. Well, and I think with grief too, is sometimes people are there to support you in your grief, but other times people might need support, right? Of like they're grieving the loss. And it's, you know, somebody that you're mutually close to. And sometimes you can't support them in their grief.
Right.
When you're experiencing it yourself as well.
That's so true, because grief actually has physical impacts on our body. For example, one thing, when somebody's in grief, the signal to recognize, are we hungry, are we thirsty, goes almost offline.
Really?
Yeah. And so with that, it's like this, again, this listener, she may be forgetting to eat, forgetting to drink. Or she may be eating, or he may be eating or drinking a lot. It's since it's offline, we don't have the right brain power to distinguish. Am I hungry right now? Am I dehydrated? And so just that physical, that's just one of the physical impacts.
But can we just talk about that? Like, that is so basic.
Yeah.
Like our most basic need, right? To eat, to drink, that goes offline. I mean, that shows you how intense grief is.
Right.
Like,
well, absolutely. There's even a more intense state that happens to our bodies. It's called broken heart syndrome. And your body can actually, if your grief is so intense, the shape of your heart changes, and it can actually cause a heart attack, and you die.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's why we hear of people that have been married for years and years and years, and their spouse or their partner dies and they die shortly thereafter.
Yeah, 21% of people that die, have the loss of a spouse over 60 have a heart attack within a couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's significant. And really the message is that grief is such a powerful emotion. And I think it's so powerful because love is such a powerful emotion. So wouldn't the compensatory emotion of grief have to encompass everything about our experience, you know?
It makes so much sense, right? Like it's kind of like, I've heard people say, when you lose somebody, the level of grief is evidence of the level of care and love that you had in the relationship, right? And it's like, yes, and that's why it's so painful. Right. It makes and I love that, the compensatory, like that makes sense to me. You know, and I also think when you think of a person that's caring for somebody, right? And they're in caregiver duties, that is not easy.
No.
Right?
No.
I remember when my dad was aging and he lost some capacity, feeling this pull of like, okay, I've got a time frame. I need you got to eat what I have your lunch here, you need to eat. And he would just kind of play in his food. And, this is towards the end. And this came over me like, be patient, Lindsay. This is a gift. You get to be with him. Be patient. And yet feeling like, and it makes me a little emotional, but just feeling like frustrated. Like, come on, eat your food. You got to just do the thing. And this kind of pull of like frustration, and yet feeling guilt, like that I wanted to show up differently, and it being difficult. I think a lot of people experience that with aging parents, knowing they used to be able to do so much. They were the caregiver, and now I'm in this reverse place, and it feels uncomfortable and unnatural in some ways.
For sure. And I think it amplifies our roles too. So if we were the child that took over a lot of the caregiving, then the whole family goes, well, then now continue with that. And that role just gets bigger. And then that person gets just overwhelmed and exhausted.
Yes.
And I saw a beautiful example of how people move with somebody that's pretty close to passing. I had a friend whose mom was passing, and my friend, you'd go in, she was with her mom. She stayed in the room, she touched her, she caressed her, she washed her, she told stories, she laughed. She was, it was hard for her to leave the room. And her sister, who loved her mom just as dearly, very close to her mom, couldn't be in her room very long. Her system couldn't tolerate what was about to happen. And she would pop in, she would go through, did we get this done? I called this person, I got this, and she would leave. And that family modeled so beautifully that both ways were okay. The sister that was popping in truly loved her mother, and she was being her best and doing her best. And my friend that had the capacity to touch and caress and laugh and tell stories was doing her best and being her best.
What a beautiful example of, lift where you stand.
Yes.
Like, this is what you can do. You can be the logistical person and make the phone calls and do the things. And you can be with mom and caress and tell stories and laugh. And both are needed.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is, in that particular family, just zero judgment. I did not hear a word of judgment. When the one sister was called, it's soon, and her sister, we were all in the room, a few other family members, and she hung up the phone and she said, well, my sister wants to know when she passes. But again, she wasn't able to come bedside. And the family just loved on her.
Wow.
It was remarkable. It was beautiful.
Boy, that's the way it should be done, right? I mean, if it can be done, let's look at that type of example. I really do think that sometimes family dynamics complicate grief as well, right? There's so many things that can complicate the grieving process. So as you were talking, how do you think we mitigate that? I mean, as I hear that, I think you give people grace. You allow them to do what they can, where their capacity and capabilities stand. Any other thoughts on that? How do we just mitigate that grieving process across family with family dynamics?
It can be tricky, and it can be as simple as, I'm choosing not to judge myself, and so I choose not to judge another in those moments. And that's the simple answer. Take the judgment out of it, and for yourself too, because just like you were saying with your dad, it's like, it's hard to feel those feelings and know time is limited.
Totally. You feel so guilty.
Yeah. And so just to acknowledge that the other person has also had likely zero training on grief. They don't know what to do, and so you're going to have misses. You're going to have mistakes. I remember when my mom was passing, my little grandson was about 5 years old, and he just sat on the bed. There was 2 beds there in the room, just watching her. And this is a rambunctious 5-year-old. And he just watched her face, and I remember thinking, I could learn a lot from that little guy, because he was at peace and silent. And I like that. Like, my move is towards silence, and other people needed to talk more. And so sometimes I just had to leave just to get back to a silent space.
Because that was regulating for you.
Yeah.
That's what felt right to you.
Yeah. And so this listener needs to really tap in and go, what do they need right now in this moment? How could they get back to the present? How could they make this moment meaningful for them? And how can they help another person have a meaningful moment as well?
Yeah. And sometimes that means taking a step back, taking a beat, taking a breath. And regrouping, right? And I love that you said, just not beating yourself up about it, recognizing like, okay, I'm feeling exhausted. Most of the time when we're caring for aging parents, we're also caring for other people in our lives. I mean, there's so many demands that are on people, children that are caring for their parents. And I think it's important to remember that. Like, you are being pulled in so many directions. Give yourself grace, right?
Absolutely. And acknowledge that you're going to have missteps. You've never been here before with this parent. And sometimes a family member can come in and go, well, when my father-in-law's passed, that's not this parent right now.
Totally.
And so that's not a helpful comment. That's their experience. But trying to compare generally isn't going to be helpful. It's like, this is this is my moment at this time with this parent, and how do I enjoy this painful process of saying goodbye? And enjoy might not be the right word, but how do I allow myself some joy in the knowing of this parent, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think what you said is important. Not like enjoy is different than joy. Like finding joy in, and I think sometimes there's beautiful grieving, like, and there is joy in actually recognizing like that this is a moment and this moment will not be here forever. And even in the challenges to recognize that, right? And also, again, I think when you're anticipating a loss, you're anticipating them going, you're trying to do the right thing every step, right?
Yep.
Even my feeling with my dad eating lunch, feeling like, I should not be feeling this way. Yeah. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, I kept thinking that in my mind, but recognizing like, it's okay because there's still a lot going on in my own world, right?
Yes.
And I'm not sitting here mistreating him or, you know, but giving myself some space for that too. And recognizing that that's okay.
Yeah. And giving the other person some space. You know, I was out of state when my father passed. And so I would try to check in and let my brother know, hey, whatever you decide, you're closest to the situation. You have my full support. You know, could I make a phone call here? Could I do this? Could I do that? And his wife gave me the feedback after a time that she felt hurt, that I was kind of feeling like they weren't doing enough. And looking at it from her side, my questions were hurtful. It certainly wasn't my intent. I was trying to be helpful in such a limited capacity. I mean, phone calls are nothing. And so to just try to get in the other person's shoes. And if you have done something that you feel like is helpful, which if you're in this process with aging parents, there's lots of eyes on it usually, come to find out it's not helpful for the other person or it's wildly misinterpreted, just step in their shoes and say, it makes sense. It makes sense that coming from that direction, it may sound like that.
I appreciate that. And I also love that you're not saying, and I should have done this better, but like you were doing the best you could with limited capacity, limited information. So both things can be true, right? You can put yourself in their shoes and say, it makes sense. And you can also say, and in my situation, it made sense. I did what I did. I was trying the best I could. And I really believe that in most of these situations, we're doing the best we can. Navigating new waters. We've never done this before, most of us, right?
Right.
This is uncomfortable. This is new territory. It's exhausting. And there's not one right way to do this.
Right.
So it's hard. It's muddy waters at best that we have to navigate, right?
Yeah.
And I hope your brother was able to give you, your brother's wife, it sounds like, was able to give you some grace.
Yeah, it worked out. It did.
Good. Well, you know, as we wrap up, I want to just make sure, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you feel like is important that we talk about?
I would like to say that, you know, Lindsay, our clinic is based on a trauma-informed lens. We deal with a lot of individuals with trauma. And trauma creates significant autoimmune disorders. And the individuals, our clients that we see, those are often not observable from the outside. They can have a good day and go on a hike, and they can have to call off work the next day because they pushed themselves too far. Autoimmune is a real challenging disorder because people aren't visibly seeing it. There's no cast on your arm. I think grief's a lot like that. This listener is looking at her aging parents, and she's still going to the store and grabbing groceries. She's probably still on the PTA board volunteering or something. She's making dinner for her children. She's talking to a neighbor. And her grief is not visible necessarily because it can be a very private matter. Absolutely. Or it can just be too exhausting to share it. And so I would say to this person, seek out the people that can allow you to grieve in a way that works for you. Seek out people that are safe for you, that you can call up and say, I got bugged, my dad wasn't eating quick enough. And they can just love on you. seek out those people that are the helpers, because you'll need them.
Absolutely. Such a good reminder. And that this listener is most likely juggling a whole host of other responsibilities as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, caring for aging parents brings up big emotions. There's just no question about it. And recognizing that you're not alone in the process, that you're doing something deeply human and incredibly hard is an important reminder. We appreciate you being here, Kathy, and the insights that you shared. And remember, if this is something that touches you or someone you love, which I imagine it does, please share it. And it is so helpful if you can rate and review on our podcast. That helps us to spread the word and get more of this information out to those who need it. Remember, you can ask questions, go directly to our podcast, and there's a link there you can click on. You can ask questions, or you can go to the Therapy Utah website. You can also ask questions there. Until next time, take care.